did you first grow curious about the paranormal? Dare you dig deeper? You are listening to Hounds of Asher.
And greetings, everyone. It's your host, Steve Asher, and you are listening to House of Asher, and we are on the air. And so let's rap about this a little bit. This is actually episode 112, and it's weird, man. We really jumped it really quickly, and I do need to say, because I always run through this real quick, but I want to say thank you to you guys at YouTube that the channel's really bumping up. I'm really getting a lot of good playback from you guys, and a lot of feedback and all this. And if you are listening to this on YouTube and you've not subscribed yet, and liked the video and shared it and pestered people to death with it and go, God, my God, you listen to this guy, please do, because I don't want you to have friends. I want to be powerful and successful and a mogul and a dictator, and walk on little people. Actually I don't, but you know what I mean. But anyway, guys, growing up through the 70s and the 80s, I was lucky enough to be exposed to a lot of really groovy stuff, like the In Search of stuff and all the different unsolved mysteries things. And then, of course, all the great books that tie in with everything from cryptids to UFOs to all kinds of stuff. And, Hollow Earth, and not just, I eat that stuff up like Menudo, which I have a serious problem with. But our guest, who's probably walking out the door now going, screw this guy's weird, is Mr. Olav Phillips, and I'm going to do a quick little intro. If I can get my intro up. Here we go. Olav Phillips is a conspiracy researcher, writer, author, and publisher specialized in the secret space program, exotic aircraft, high technology, foreign policy, prehistory, mystery civilizations, and the Secret Life of Paul Lynde. No, actually, you should write a book about Secret Life of Paul Lynde, and I want to contribute to it. But actually, he has actually written some interesting books: The Secret Space Race and Tales of a Heretic, the collected writings of a heretic conspiracy researcher. That's such a metal title. I like that. Hey, Olav, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm still here. I didn't say screw the shit.
Okay, well, let me. I'm not trying hard enough, but
try harder.
So, man, like I told you, I do this very, very fast and loose. And
you haven't heard my podcast,
man.
My podcast's even worse,
dude. I've been following stuff. I've been checking out, like your lectures and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. I guess technically I've been stalking your work, but in a good way. Yeah, I'm your biggest fan. as they like to say.
Okie dokie.
That's scary.
Creepy.
Yeah, creepy. Not creepy at all. When a 55 or 55, well, I feel like I'm 55. 50-year-old bald man starts saying, "I'm your biggest fan." Anyway, but
it's okay. I'm a 44-year-old tall fat guy with a beard. It's all good.
You're a kid. You're just a kid. So, all right. Before we really kind of get into, like warrior historians of the Third Reich and Alternative 3 and all
right.
this stuff. Which, how often do I get to say, let's talk about the warrior historians of the Third Reich? Hardly ever. Hardly ever, but I think there needs to be more of it because it's interesting stories.
It is.
And speaking of all this, something happened to you. Okay, let me explain this. Like if you got comedians, you have writers, you have investigators. Somebody had what I call a Batman moment. Something happened, you had some experience, maybe you seen a thing, heard a thing, come across some paperwork, and then started going down the rabbit hole, and you went, holy crap, this looks like it's actually real. What happened?
With Alternative 3? Well, so for the younger members of your audience, there used to be these things called VHS tapes, and they deteriorated every time you would copy them. They'd get worse. And through a friend, this is obviously pre-YouTube, pre-everything, in the 90s, through a friend, I got a copy of Alternative 3, and it was trashed. I mean, the tracking was blown out. It just was really hard to watch. But I watched it, and I thought to myself, oh, boy, this is hilarious. And, I recognized some of the actors. One guy in particular named Shane Rimmer. He plays Bob Grodin, and he was a fixture on Gary Anderson movies. If you know who Gary Anderson is, he did like UFO and Thunderbirds Are Go, and he specialized in supermarionation, but he did these live action shows with these weird models like UFO and others. Space 1999 was his deal, which is interesting because it has most of the people from Mission Impossible.
Right, it's like Mission Impossible in space.
But the story is asinine.
No, it's beautiful. I mean,
kind of, except it's a good show. People should watch it. I mean, Martin Landau, Barbara Bain, they're great actors. Well, anyway, so I watched it, and I just kind of tossed the tape back, and then I watched it again and again, and over years, and I'd watch it every once in a while, and suddenly one day it dawned on me. I'm like, there's something odd about this. I keep watching it, I guess for the comedy value, but there's something weird about this, that unlike a lot of mockumentaries, it's very specific about certain things. And I thought that there was an oddness about the structure of it, that the story they were telling was too tight. If you watch some of the mockumentaries like Spinal Tap, or you watch something like Documentary Now, or these things where they're obviously fake documentaries,
like the things we do in the shadows and stuff like that, like the vampires and stuff.
Yeah, things we do in the shadows. So there's like a looseness to it. This was like very calculated, and so I decided to do some research in the very beginnings of the internet, and I was reading about the weirdness that surrounds it. And they had shown it. It was supposed to be shown on April 1st. It got shown in June, I think, because they're having a strike. And so when they showed it, it caused like mass panic through the UK and Scandinavia where they were showing it. And I thought to myself, well, that this is very much a War of the Worlds kind of thing, but it's very tight. And I thought, they're very specific. If this is real, and you kind of, on one hand, I'm a dystopian, so on one hand you kind of want it to be real, because you want to realize that you found something,
and you want to be Snake Plissken. Who doesn't want to be Snake Plissken?
Yeah, you do. I wanted to be Snake Plissken for sure. I wanted to be bad like Snake Plissken, but smart like Buckaroo Banzai. And it's, it just dawned on me that if this is real, I should be able to find this stuff. So a few years ago, I finally, I'd write about it or talk about it or whatever. And I was living in England at the time. And this guy sent me an email. He said, "You're really interested in Alternative 3." And I said, "Yeah." And he says, "Do you have a good copy of it?" And I said, "No, I have a trashy copy. That there are no good copies. The masters were actually destroyed in a fire, so there is no master of all the contracts, master film reels. So it was shot on 16 millimeter. It was all destroyed in a fire." And he goes, I have a copy of the master." And I said, "How's that possible? It was destroyed." He goes, "Don't ask me that. Just take my word for it. I have a copy of the master." I'm like, "Okay." He goes, "You want a copy?" I said, "Well, hell yeah." So one day I go to the mailbox, and there's a manila envelope, and there's no return address. But it's made out to me in the Royal Mail, and I open it up, and there's a DVD with a Post-it note, and it just says something like "Enjoy." And there's a DVD in there, and the DVD it's just, it's like you bought a DVD at a Best Buy or Costco or something. It was just a normal DVD. So I pop it in, and it is immaculate. It is a master copy. So I watched it, and at that point, it really, what I had been thinking for years really galvanized in my head. I said, I'm watching it pristine now, and I think this is real, and if it's real, I should be able to prove it. So I went through every piece of information in the show that they release, right? What happened for Alternative 1? What happened for Alternative 2? What happened for Alternative 3? Why did they start the program? I didn't worry about people's names, because that's really not, the names are all cooked up. And then I took a critical look at it. I'm making notes. And then it dawned on me that this guy, this astronaut that had supposedly found out information, his name was Bob Groden. And I'm like, well, that's a funny name. And they're describing him. They have the narrator. He kind of describes, this is Bob Groden. He was a celebrated astronaut. Now he's an alcoholic who's been married 3 times, and blah blah blah. And I'm thinking, that was Buzz Aldrin in 1977 when this show was made. That was Buzz Aldrin. He was an alcoholic. He had been married 3 times. He was kind of a bit of a mess and getting himself together. And I thought, well, that's really odd. That just made me think that it was real even more. So I went through everything that they talk about specifically, and I document it. And then I started hunting for these things that they talk about. And I found them. All of them. Which was very scary.
Well, what do you think the point of putting all that out? I mean, do you think it was sort of like a soft disclosure, or do you even believe in disclosure in regards of that they, kind of spoon feed us a little bit of this and that over generations, or
I don't actually believe in disclosure. I don't think that we're ever going to get disclosure.
Why would they?
Yeah, why would they? And anybody who's been around the military, in the military, that that they've done so much to cover it up. Number one, in the military, they don't feel like they owe you an explanation. They're like, hey, you come over here and take this shot. And you're like, okay. They don't really specialize in disclosing information. And so it's counter to how the military industrial complex works. And frankly, some secrets should be kept secret, which I firmly believe, which is weird for a conspiracy guy, I know. But it's honestly, it's okay. I have a psycho dog. Alternative 3 is funny. It's you ask yourself, why did they do it? And I think a lot of it comes down to this concept in conspiracy theory called the revelation of the method. That for whatever reason, sometimes they tell you what they're going to do to you before they do it, but they soft pedal it to you through like TV or in a book or in a story or whatever. The other thing is that there's a tendency, as conspiracy researchers, we think that things are more complicated than they are. Because, in the military, there's an idea in the CIA and other places of hiding under the flagpole. You can do something in broad daylight, nobody will notice because nobody looks. So why they did it, I think it is very much an argument for revelation of the method, that they're telling you what they're going to do before they do it. And unlike a lot of, like, when you walk around a conspiracy convention, everybody and their brother is like talking about the secret space program, but they all have this like angle, like, well, the space brothers are here to help us, and the blue circle ships are going to land, or the circle ships are going to land, and the blue chickens are going to get out and save us.
Right. The Palladians are here to teach us how to do our hair like elves, and everything's going to be cool. And we'll have holodecks and all that shit. Right.
And, and you don't need money, but it turns out you do. And, it's like, maybe I'm just too pragmatic, but I don't buy it. And so I looked at this thing and it's crappy. It's negative. It's sad. It's not good. And I thought, maybe there's legs to it.
Well, that's the thing.
But I think they're hiding it in front of you. That's what I think.
Well,
to answer your question.
No, totally. I mean, and I appreciate that. I don't know. Maybe because of my background dealing with sort of the worst people in the world and corrections and things, and just being, like you said, a bit of a pragmatist and just kind of a realist, because I'm thinking, like, unless these guys are, because anyone we've ever known with power rules over someone else. It's just the nature of it. And they say, well, it's human nature. And I said, well, if you read in ancient texts and even oral traditions of people and stuff like that, and they talk about someone who comes who's more powerful, they decimate the place, and if you don't go underground or whatever,
that's right,
you don't make it. So I'm not seeing these guys coming down and you know what I'm saying? Like, hey, let's cure polio.
Where are they?
Whoosh. Yeah, where were they at? You know, why did they not stop? Why did they not stop the bombs in Nagasaki and all that?
Sure.
There's people that actually believe, and maybe they're right, but I'm kind of thinking they're not, that, well, hey, you know, it's almost like, and before I go on here, don't give me any hate mail, but, you know, there are certain people think, you know, well, before they drop the bomb, because I'm from the South and that's how they would talk, the Lord is going to come up and he's going to stop. He's here. His angels will return and he will stop the. I'm thinking, are you freaking high?
You know, since you brought that up, I don't generally do politics or religion, but there is a very interesting documentary called Marjo about this guy named Marjo Gortner, and he did a stint as a tent revival preacher, and then he was an actor and a country music singer in the 70s, but his name is Marjo Gortner, and he actually had these guys follow him around while he did the tent revivals, and they're very interesting. But you know, it's funny when you watch that, and then as obviously you were in corrections, you know, you understand human nature. And the one thing that really appealed to me about the story of Alternative 3 was that it is human nature and perfection. You know, to you know, just to cut to the chase, right? You know, something bad's coming, and we're going to save ourselves, and the rest of you, good luck. Yeah. You know, and
I've got mine.
Yeah, you know. I got mine, and I'm leaving, and we'll come back later and see how you're doing. And you know, it was it's the antithesis of everything else in the secret space program world. And I looked at it and I thought, you know, if there were a bunch of people in power, whether they're in the government, a government of any government, or above the government, you know, the first thing they're going to think is, I got mine. I'm out of here. And that played to the realism of it. You know, if you watch the documentary as being real and assume that what they're saying is true, because a bunch of the stuff in there is actually true, you watch it and you think to yourself, you know, that makes sense. You know, they're going to go, and it's not, you know, they're not going to space lift like the entire 6 billion people on the earth and move them to Mars. That ain't going to happen. You know, this is like when worlds collide. It's like I can pack 30 people into a rocket and start over. I mean, that's pretty much the game plan here, you know, on a larger scale. And the other thing that really made sense to me is that, you know, we can walk through the alternatives, but the second alternative was to build bunkers. And it was like, okay, so one class of people, and obviously, you know, it's not just rich people. I mean, there's scientists and doctors and
people with skills and talents that are necessary.
People with, to reconstruct it. But all the people that are high that fail, you know, it's like, well, we're going to build some bunkers and we'll put you in there. And again, you know, you're seeing the stratification of this elite structure, and that made sense to me. It's not like, you know, the circle ship's going to land and we're all going to get inside and fly to utopia. You know, it's a very nasty outcome. That's why I call it the end game of the New World Order, because, you know, if you buy into it and you think that it's real, which I do, that you know, there's something bad coming, and their plan is to take a hike.
Well, all right, dig this. One of the things that you was talking about, like the New World Order, that in itself is a misnomer. I mean, it's the old world order. It's the power structures, and I'm not, and of course I'm not sounding crazy when you say that, but I mean it is. You know,
I think it's the aristocracy.
Well,
because they've been in power for 2,000 years.
Yeah. What was the old Who song? Meet the new boss, same as the old boss, and it's just a thing of it's just continual, man. It is. It's nepotism of the highest caliber, and
of course,
you know, in the times when you was a kid. Okay, and I said I'm a hair older than you, and I remember back in the Bionic Man days, and
sure,
yeah, man, I remember like the Sid and Marty Krofft, like Bigfoot and Wild Boy stuff. You know,
I saw it in
thought,
reruns, but yeah.
oh, dude, I watch it all the time on YouTube. Plug. But you know, I seriously thought by now, you know, when I was a little kid, man, we're gonna have our own little, you know, our little bubble covered pods, the Jetsons, and then you know, be able to blip from here and there and transmute, you know, and you know, like in Star Trek and all that. Because like when I was a kid, I really loved Star Trek because that was what was out there. And then 1977 or something like that.
Battlestar Galactica.
Battlestar Galactica, and also Star Wars. And that really caught my eye.
Sure.
But it was sort of a thing where, don't get me wrong, I would love to see elements of Star Trek being incorporated. You know, where everything's not necessarily a class system, but it still kind of is.
Sure, there's structure. There's a hierarchy.
Right. But it's, you know, if poverty is taken away, I mean, a lot of poverty was taken away in Germany, too, in World War II, because they put everybody to work with a shovel. So, I mean, it depends on what that quality of life is. But it's, I think when you are, and it depends. If you're a young person who's idealistic, maybe you go more towards Star Trek. If you have maybe stuff going on in your head and at home, you know, everything's a Rorschach test. You know, I always ask people, you know, which do you like, Star Wars or Star Trek? Which I there's elements of both I enjoy, and I go why? And I go why? What element? And then somebody's, well, you know, the blast and the hero defeats evil and he rises up. So okay, so it's like a superhero thing. You're trying to find the strength that maybe you don't have, like somebody in the Hulk or whatever. But,
you know what my answer is?
Lay it on me.
Blade Runner.
Blade Runner. Oh my God, yes.
You know, Blade Runner was set in 2019.
Yeah, and it
in
sucks.
Fact,
and Rutger Hauer died. You know,
Rutger Hauer died. But what's odd is that, you know, a few months ago it was actually Roy Batty's incept date.
What?
You know, it was his birthday, you know, a few years ago. So that whole, you know, obviously it's set a little in the future of now, but you know, the replicants that are killed in the movie, their incept dates were 2019, and I see elements of Blade Runner, the dystopianness of it, starting to filter into society. You know, we're going in that direction. But you see, I'm a dystopian. I'm not a utopian. I'm a dystopian. So, you know, I see it in a different way. I think it's a more pragmatic view.
Yeah.
And again, that goes back to Alternative 3. I mean, Alternative 3 in and of itself is a very dystopian story. I mean, the preparations and the model of what they're trying to do, you know, it is very much not a utopian world. You know, some of the things that they talk about doing in it are very bad. And I think there's evidence that they're doing it. But it's very bad. It's counter to, you know, what you as an American, for example, or a European, if you're Italian or French or German or English or Belgian or Finn or whatever, you know, nobody in their right mind would really want to do some of the things that they advocate in the show. So.
Well, you know, when you look at like other works of like Philip K. Dick, you know, the Scanner Darkly and things like that, there's a lot of things that, and you'll hear a train too.
That's okay.
I
like trains.
You have a thing. Yeah, I do too sometimes. And a lot of times they're part of the show. So, hey, there's a train, everybody.
There you go.
But it's a thing where, and I say this kind of jokingly, tongue-in-cheek as it were, but what if Blade Runner is actually a documentary about maybe a timeline that maybe we didn't have the Black Plague, and so our technologies did not have that stall out, and maybe they had the technology in 2019.
I think what Blade Runner is I think Blade Runner is the future. I think we just, you know, a lot of the things that they talk about in Blade Runner, you know, we have the capability to build. I think that Philip K. Dick and by proxy, the guy who directed it, Ridley Scott, I think that they saw the future that's coming. They just got the date wrong, because we're going to get there. The overcrowding and, you know, in the cities, environmental damage, you know, it's all there and it's all coming. And the way that I think about it is that, like, if you want to put it in terms of like movies, I think about like Alternative 3 being the beginning, Children of Men being the middle, and Blade Runner being the end.
So where does A Boy and His Dog fall into that?
That's way past the end. Come on, the dog talks.
All dogs talk. We just forgot that we don't know how to talk to them anymore. That's as utopian as I'm going to get. Yeah.
12 Monkeys. I mean, there's a lot of movies that they kind of portray that future. Terry Gilliam makes a lot. Brazil, The Zero Theorem. I mean, there's a lot of them. If you want a really good one that's bizarre, it's actually a little hard to watch, but it's good. You want Quintet. Quintet's a very interesting dystopian film because it's basically the Earth has plunged into an ice age, and there are these huge hives where people used to live, and they pretty much all died, and they have this like bizarre suicidal game called Quintet, and Paul Newman's in it. It's very bizarre, very strange film, but it was done by the same guy that did MASH and a bunch of others. But it's actually, I think if you follow the Alternative 3 model, or even Blade Runner or Children of Men, I think where we're going to end up is something like Quintet.
Right. That was like 77, 78, I think.
Yeah, Robert Altman.
Yeah. Or no, 79, I think. It was one of the, I think it was,
late
that
70s.
Obviously, yeah. There were sideburns. There were sideburns. So.
Yeah, there were sideburns. It's a very weird movie.
I mean, like I said, I know we bounce all over the place. And I probably should say this. We're right about the 30-minute mark. Olav Phillips, everybody. And by the way, too, and I want to ask you again toward the end, where can people find your books and the shows you're involved in? And just
ParanoiaMagazine.com.
Yeah, well, I mean, I know you do a lot for that, and you did it for some more too. Like there were a couple other ones and some other radio shows, which feel free to throw them out.
Because, the Paranoia podcast, sure.
Right.
It's all centered around Paranoia is your gateway to all things.
Paranoia all things are paranoia.
Yes. That's right.
I should probably say it. I'm telling you, man, you should put that on a shirt, and I only ask for maybe an eighth of a percent of that. But everybody, you are listening to the House of Asher, and I probably should have mentioned this earlier in the show, but I was just in awe of this gentleman. Most likely you're hearing us on YouTube, maybe Stitcher, SoundCloud, Spotify, and globally through Paranormal UK Radio. Cheers, guys. Good on you. But so anyway, back to the crazy world that we.
Well, it would probably be beneficial if I outline the three alternatives, because it kind of makes sense, and give you a basic idea of what Alternative 3 is, because we're kind of dancing around it.
Right.
So basically, it's this mockumentary, and in the mockumentary, there are all these disappearing scientists, the brain drain, and they're trying to figure out where they're all going, and they're just vanishing. They're finding cars. It's in England. They're finding cars at Heathrow, and people are dying in car accidents and whatever. People are sending fake postcards to their parents, yada yada, and so they're trying to hunt this down. And so the narrator, the kind of host, he meets up with this guy, Professor Ballantyne, and Ballantyne works for a fake university, and he's talking about in 1957 they figured out something bad, and basically that there was going to be an ecological collapse at some point in the future, and they came up with three alternatives. And so the thing they found out in 57, they specifically referenced the American Chemical Society meeting in late 1957. So I went and looked, and there was a guy from Scripps Oceanographic Institute. He had done a pioneering study of phytoplankton and their ability to process carbon dioxide. Remember, this is 57. We're not talking 77. We're talking 57. And he had determined that the phytoplankton were actually processing the carbon dioxide at 50% of the output that they thought they would, which means that they're not near as efficient as what we've been told for the last 50 years, 60 years now. And so they decided, they being whoever they are, the powers that be, decided to come up with a plan to try to fix it. So, there was a lot of buildup in the 50s through the 70s. And so they came up with alternative one, which was to blow a hole in the upper atmosphere with a nuclear device to try to vent the carbon dioxide into space.
That was an actual idea that was put out. I mean, that was straight up.
They did it. They actually did it. It was called Project Hardtack Argus. They detonated a nuclear weapon extremely high in the atmosphere, ostensibly to create something called the Christophilus effect, which was basically to make a artificial Van Allen radiation belt. But the reality is that they actually launched two, but one was really, really high. And they classified that program into the 80s. And then the second alternative was to build bunkers, and they decided they couldn't build them fast enough. And, the thing I always say is, do I really need to tell you that they build bunkers? I mean, the Russians have two mountains, Kosmatev and Yamato, that they literally hollowed out. We have tons of bunkers everywhere. And the third alternative was to leave to go to Mars by way of the moon. And so and then it's a big long thing about how it all works. So, for example, the negative stuff that I brought up, one of the things that they talk about is that once you have these people on the moon and Mars or wherever, that you need a kind of workforce to maintain, janitors, plumbers, whatever. And their solution was something they call batch consignments. Basically, they go abduct people, and they abduct a bunch of people, space lift them to Mars, and then use them as slave labor. And I always talk about the missing 411 stuff that David Paulides he does. Yeah. Paulides. And he had a map. He has a map on his website with little stickers where people disappear. So I overlaid that onto a map that was done by this guy named Tall back in the early 90s, like 91. And it showed supposed saucer bases. Well, if you overlay the Paulides map over Tall's map, and you have to stretch it and contort it a little bit, but pretty much where all these disappearances are is where Tall said that there were saucer bases. Now, on one hand, you could say, well, aliens are abducting people and not returning them. But on the other hand, if alternative 3 is real, then they're they're space lifting people out of these places to go and be slave labor. And then the alternative 2.5, as I call it, was geoengineering. So if you look, there's a very interesting way to prove that chemtrails are real. And I'm not an advocate of a chemtrail fleet. I think that's ridiculous. But what I do believe is I believe they're putting this stuff into the fuel. So basically, if you want to see the chemtrail fleet, look up in the sky and watch a commercial airliner. It's not every airliner. In order for it to work right, there's probably some mathematical equation of how often they get the chemtrail fuel versus the normal fuel. But there's a very interesting way that you can actually prove that chemtrails are real. So back in the 80s, I think it was, Dr. Edward Teller, the father of the hydrogen bomb, he wrote an op-ed called Sunscreen for the Planet Earth, where he had advocated for geoengineering, basically dumping particulate at high altitude to reflect the sunlight and to lower the temperature of the earth and offset the greenhouse effect. Well, one of the byproducts of dumping particulate, and when I tell you this, you'll actually probably think about it and go, I thought so. When you dump that crap up in the air, up at the high altitude, and it's swirling around up there, it actually, by reflecting sunlight and changing the albedo, the reflectivity of the earth, you actually make the earth darker. And so you can chart the darkening of the surface of the earth over time. And it actually starts in the late 50s and the early 60s. And it just keeps going up. It gets darker and darker and darker. And one of the interesting things that I saw accidentally is I was watching Nova, and they had done a documentary after 9/11, where when 9/11 happened, it was the first time in recorded modern history that there were no airplanes in the sky, except for some F-15s, or here we had F-18s, flying around the cities, whatever. But no commercial airliners were active inside the U.S. except for Looking Glass, which is a doomsday plane, and military. Okay, so a bunch of atmospheric scientists were like, "Oh my God, I've got to take advantage of this." So they all ran outside and started floating balloons to see what happens when there's suddenly no airplanes. And what they figured out is that over the 2 or 3 days that no aircraft were allowed to fly in the contiguous United States, that the temperature of the Earth rose, and within the United States, the temperature of the ground rose, and the amount of sunlight getting to the Earth massively increased. So it suddenly became super bright, way hotter, like a couple of degrees in a matter of days. And so you can prove that this stuff is actually active because the Earth is getting darker. It's called global dimming. The other thing that you see is that when you look at when in the early 60s, let's say, that they started the geoengineering program, in order to change the reflectivity of the Earth, the stuff that they're dumping at high altitude has to be metallic because it has to reflect sunlight. Well, you see a rise in autism rates and you see a rise in Alzheimer's rates, and the Alzheimer's specifically is caused by aluminum being in your brain. And so you see an increase in Alzheimer's that matches the dimming effect and the control of the temperature. And what you see is the temperature kind of normalized and leveled out with spikes around eruptions like Pinatubo or whatever. When, Mount St. Helens, Pinatubo, when these things go off, it screws with their program. So, the temperature will increase or the Earth will get darker. It'll have a weird causal effect. But you can totally prove that it's happening. And then obviously it goes, they go to Mars.
Well, wasn't there, I'm blanking on what it's called. There's a condition where people would get, it almost looks like fibers in their skin.
Oh, yeah.
Wasn't
I forget the name of it.
Well, weren't they saying that was connected with the testing as well?
People have claimed that. Nobody's been able to definitively link that to anything in particular. But yeah, they get fibers in their skin, and they feel like there's like worms crawling inside their skin. Yeah, I forget the name of it.
Yeah, that's no bueno.
No, and you can see videos. There are videos of them actually pulling the fiber bundles out of the skin.
Is it fibromyalgia?
No, fibromyalgia is like an indeterminate pain. This is something else. Yeah, it's okay. I forget the name of it right now. But a lot of weird things started happening once they did that, because you're screwing with Mother Nature, and if there's one thing that we should have learned by now is that if you screw with Mother Nature screws back.
Morgellons, I think was the name of it.
Morgellons.
I suck at this. Yeah. I'm sorry, I'm not wearing my glasses.
It's okay. But a bunch of weird stuff started to happen, and it's because you're screwing with the atmosphere, and the big thing that they're trying to keep moving is what's called the conveyor belt. There's this conveyor belt that exists where cold, clear water melts off at a certain rate off the North Pole and will dump into the salt water, and it changes the salinity and it creates a conveyor belt. Whereas as the clear water becomes more and more salt water, that it rotates around and goes back up to the North Pole. And that's actually what drives the climate in the eastern United States and in continental Europe. And so what happens when the conveyor belt slows down or stops or these things happen, it really messes with the weather. That's the basis of the superstorms.
Well, I know, just talking as a southerner here in Kentucky, and it's one of these things. Everybody goes, well, everybody looks back and sort of the halcyon of their youth and go, oh, I remember it was like this. I mean, I remember, seasons and things, and and it's gotten here now where we're actually having an influx of, armadillos and things that were just not.
Oh, wow.
Prevalent or not really present. And, there's so much changing up now, because I was raised in this a lot of times without, air conditioning, fans in the window, just poor Kentucky people. But it's like, Jesus Christ, man. I mean, if it keeps going like it's going, I may be moving up north, somewhere in the mountains or something, getting out of this.
When I was a kid here, we had defined seasons. Our seasons in California are not like yours, but we had defined seasons. And I remember as a kid, when the rain season would start, it usually starts around in October. and it'll start raining for a while. And, I remember playing soccer and being out on the soccer field and watching lightning, miles away, and hearing thunder and these rainstorms. And, a few years ago, it's been a couple of years now, but a few years ago, maybe 5 years ago, we went through an entire year where it rained once. And I haven't seen, now we get maybe one thunderstorm a year, and I like them. So I'm always excited. It's like, oh, thunderclap. But, we only get maybe one or two a year now. And we've actually, just in the time that I've lived where I live now, which is about 10 years, it's actually snowed here probably 3 times. Like every 3 years or so, it'll snow. I mean, not heavy snow. It's very dusty snow, but it snows. And it's like, dude, I'm too low for it to snow. I'm at 500 feet above sea level. It should not be snowing here.
Right, that's about where we're at. I mean,
and I'm not high enough on the latitude line to be able to. This isn't Oregon or Washington. I mean, I'm a ways down in California. If you look at San Francisco, its latitude is not that high. So,
well, this is slightly off topic, but it's kind of on topic. So, humor me.
Sure.
You always see folks like here, because it rains quite a bit in this area, and so there's always that, like people in California or out on that part of the coast. It's like it's rain, get in the house. It's it's mass hysteria, right? And then we get snow, and they're like, holy hell, what is this? Bread and butter. Everybody's running to the store, clearing the shelves off, and then people up in Wisconsin's like, yeah, that's cute. So everyone has their own kind of extreme weather, but everyone, for whatever reason, doesn't connect that, it's heavy duty to somebody. Something that you be dealing with is going to be extremely throw somebody off.
Well, when I lived in England, right, the latitude of where I lived in England was pretty high, and it was bad enough that like during the winter, we would really only have about 4 to 6 hours of daylight. And that includes like dusk, which lasted forever. If you wanted like daytime, it would only be maybe 3 hours of like daytime. And, you'd get snow and hail and sleet, within a 1 hour period. It would snow, hail, sleet, rain all at once. And one of the things that was really funny is that when we were there in the summer, here in California, it'll get where I live, it's between 90 and 100 degrees. At the height. It's August now. It's actually kind of chilly for August right now. But in general, it'll get up to like 100 degrees or whatever. So we all have air conditioners or swamp coolers or whatever. Well, when I was in England, nobody has an air conditioner. I mean, we did, but it was very uncommon for you to have an air conditioner. And one day, the temperature got up to like 90 degrees. And we were watching the BBC, and it was like, oh, it's 90 degrees. It's like the apocalypse. Old people are dying. Children are melting in the streets. It's like, dude, when I lived in Davis, it was like 117. We could literally like cook eggs on the asphalt. But now, a few months, like a month ago, I think, or a month and a half ago, it was like 114 in Paris. I'm telling you, Paris is not equipped for 114 degree weather. It's going bonkers. And what we're seeing is, like Alternative 3 prophesies, what we're seeing is more extreme weather. In some places it's like extremely dry, in other places it's extremely wet, but it's these extremes that are constantly being cooked up. A couple of years ago, I went to school to pick up my son, and they have a little sign, and it was like, on the sign, I took a photo of it. It's like 117. It never gets to be 117 here, ever. 110 maybe in the middle of August, but 117 in like June? No way. But since then, it's been very cold actually. I've got a breeze, and it's actually a little chilly.
Well, okay, let me ask you this, and obviously, we do. Touch on stuff, talking about, breakaway civilizations, and as I was talking about, space.
But that's
Nazis,
why they're breaking away. They're leaving because of this.
They're wiping what they stepped in off their feet or what they built, and said, yeah, maybe we'll try this other planet. I mean, do you feel that some of the other problems, and I'm not trying to get too social political, but
Sure.
I've heard some people say that we're at the point now that our life expectancy is starting to go back. We're starting to lose. What I'm saying? We're starting to devolve.
We are.
And I don't know if we've kind of hit a evolutionary, threshold. Kind of what?
I wouldn't say that it's an evolution is a very funny thing. You chart evolution over hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years. So I don't think you ever see evolution that quickly. But what I think we have reached is that we have, it's funny, we hear about overpopulation all the time. But the population rates in the West, like in America, Canada, Western world, England, Scotland, Ireland, Sweden, Italy, whatever, the population rates are actually decreasing. We've reached a point where we're no longer putting enough children back into the system to maintain our population rates. We're actually declining in population. And you don't see it because in America and Canada and other places, and in Europe, we have a constant influx of people coming in, so you don't see it. But, if you look at the water has birth control pill medication in it. It has stuff called Premarin, which is for when women get old.
The menopause.
Menopause medications in there. Stoma, which is a muscle relaxant, Xanax, Valium. It's all in the water. And you could argue that they're either spiking it or we're consuming so much of it that what goes in must come out, and we're peeing it out into the water, and we're not filtering it, and so our population rate is actually decreasing. That it used to be like 3 children, and then it was like 2.5. Now I think it's like 1.8, something like that.
Do you think that ties into the? I'm sorry to jump in what you were saying, but do you think that this sort of ties in with the whole Georgia Guidestone type, belief? Now, do you think that more or less is verbatim kind of what's happening?
I think that's verbatim the plan. I think that's the end result. But you being from Kentucky, you'll understand this. That if you're going to cook a frog, right? Do you throw the frog in boiling water so it'll jump out, or do you put the frog in lukewarm water and then slowly crank it until you're boiling it? You put it in lukewarm water and you crank it. So I think that that's the end result that they're going for, and I think that if Alternative 3 plays out, whether it's a meteorite or it's ecological instability or whatever causes the event that they're afraid of, I think that that's what they expect to find when they come back. Because, I know it's counterintuitive, but where we're actually heading is toward an ice age. And, when we get there, where I'm at, where you're at, we'll probably be all right. But, across the upper portions of the United States and Canada, you're going to be sitting under a half a mile of ice. So... a lot of the bread baskets. And actually, this is interesting. So there's a thing out there, these Chinese ghost cities, where the Chinese have gone out and built these massive cities that basically have like 100 people that live in them. They're gorgeous, massive, huge cities, right? Well, if you look at the distribution of those cities, you have to remember that the Chinese are multi-generational thinkers. They don't think what's going to happen in a week or a month or a year. They think about what's going to happen in 100 years or 1,000 years. And so if you look at the distribution of these ghost cities, right, they're actually along the ice line in Mongolia. They're also inland far enough that if the sea levels rise, they would be basically beachfront property. They've also built a bunch of them in Africa, further inland. So it almost seems like they're hedging their bets against an ice age of some sort.
Well, yeah, they definitely seem like they're kind of going kind of preemptive on it. And, that's the thing, we're touching certain political things because political stuff ties into this. You hear
I'm not
Trump.
making a judgment of who's right.
No, I mean, I've
I'm
always
just telling you the way it is.
no. I mean, I've always went on record of going like, look, man, even though things were sideways, you know, I am American, I am human, I am Earthling or Terran or whatever, but I always tried to respect whoever are
first.
right, man. But it's a thing of going. It does. I don't care who's in the White House or whatever. I'll try to give them proper respect to the title or the job position.
Right.
I'm not saying I'm going to go along with everything this guy says or that lady says. But
Same here.
But you get the thing right now. It's our guy that's running things right now. Man, he's an easy target with some of the stuff he pulls, and Space Force. Okay, Space Force. Which, like you said, I believe it's been set up for a while. I think it's probably was in the processes of going into it in the early 60s and
well, I'll put it to you this way. In 1961, right, before we ever did anything on the moon, in 1961, the U.S. Air Force created a project called Lunex, right, where they wanted to build a moon base. The Army in 62, I think it was, created a project called Horizon to build a moon base. And the Russians, the Soviets at the time, they had one called Zvezda where they wanted to build a moon base. So in the early 60s, before we ever had a man land on the moon, you've already got the Army, the Air Force, and the Soviets all planning to put bases on the moon and actually working toward that goal. So, by now, they have to have something up there. It'd be ludicrous for them not to. It would just be absurd.
Well, you remember back in, like in the Wayback Machine. Let's get in the Wayback Machine, and you had like guys like what's his name, Valiant Thor.
Oh, Valiant Thor.
Yeah, right. And all these different.
My favorite.
I
love Valiant Commander Dawn. Yeah, with two N's. That's Space Age.
Yeah, very much so. And that kind of you can kind of see him in a almost something like a outfit, like one of those silver outfits that only only a Venusian 1950 sci-fi person or Lux Interior from the Cramps could wear.
But
yes,
you never see a picture of Valiant Thor or Commander Dawn. There was a woman too, and I can't remember her name. But you never see Valiant Thor or Commander Dawn ever dressed in a silver jumpsuit. What you do see them dressed in is suits. There are photos of them.
Yeah, well,
they're wearing suits. Nice suits.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm sure they got some scratch. But just like you look at, oh God, like you touch off on all that, and it ties in with, I'm not trying to go Nazi crazy, but of course, all the scientists from here and whatnot, and then even before that, you tie in with, like you said, like the Vril Society and all this weird kind of spiritualist, It was
Orgone energy and all that stuff.
Yeah. Anybody, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that may not be a thing. It depends if you're a particularly spiritual person or not. I was more so. I was raised up religious. I mean, you're in the South, man. You can't walk 5 feet and bump into a church. So you're gonna have some sort of education or religious indoctrination. Fell out of it, and I wouldn't say I'm spiritual. I don't think I'm that deep, but I think I'm open to show me something and show me some facts, and that might be a thing. But I think if there is an energy or a great force or whatever it is, I think it's more like that wall socket, across the room from me. Mm-hmm. It can help you or it can kill you. It's more or less how you implement it and you engage with it.
My belief is I believe in the universe, that there's some order to the universe, and I believe in something called the golden path. And if you walk the golden path, if you do things the way that you should be doing them, and you do what you're naturally called to do, right? Because, let's face it, we all have natural, just intrinsic skills. If you do that and you walk that golden path, things have a tendency to work out. I don't know why, they just do. If you drift to either side, left or right, and this is not political, but it's more just the left or the right. If you start to drift, as you drift away from the center, things become more chaotic and they function less well. And so that's how I do stuff. I try to follow the golden path.
Well, I'll tell you this. I'm a little bit more. Well, I'm not saying that you're not dualistic on it, but my thing is, I think by nature, by our human thing, people are either very happy and they're over the top happy, or they're going to be very down, or stuff's going to build up and they're going to lash out. But I think generally, if you're sort of a moderate, personality, unless you're like, manic or bipolar or something, and God bless the folks that are, the world is just like a rubber band. You pull a certain way, it's going to pull you back. It's just the nature, the ebb and flow of entropy, But,
it's the same concept. The universe kind of, the universe is amoral. That it's not, the universe is not there to make the world perfect. The universe corrects. So which makes sense, entropy. If you're doing bad things will happen. If you do good things will happen. It's kind of a causal relationship. Right. If our bridge, we have a bunch of bridges, and it's California, so they charge you for everything. And back in the day, you can't do it anymore because it's like $6 to cross a bridge. But a long time ago, it used to be like $1. And what you would find is that there was a kind of tradition that people would do if they wanted to have a good day, that when they pulled up to nowadays we use something called fast track, so it's all radio transponders. But back in the day, you would pull up to the toll gate, and instead of giving the toll taker $1, you give them a $10 bill. Say, pay for the next 10 cars behind me, and then just go. And then that would pay for the next 10 cars. Well, what would happen is, to kind of pay it forward, the guys behind you would be like, well, take my $1 anyway. And you get to this point where, some dude had put $10 in, but by the end of it, 100 people have basically not had to pay toll by the end of the commute period. Right. And what it would do is it would lessen the commute. The commute would be better because people are just driving through, and then good things would happen. It kind of, the happy spread. And,
well,
that's a thing.
Simple things help, man. I mean, what they say, a smile and a kind word doesn't cost you anything. But
no.
Let me ask you this. Like I said, we're down to about the last 3 minutes of this, and like I said, I'm going to have to, if you would agree to come back, I definitely want to get a little bit deeper into the stuff on the moon and more. Man, we had to talk about space Nazis, but in the last minute or two, throw me just a little caveat of something quirky about the tie-ins with, of course, space Nazis. A little primer for the next time we come through.
Betty and Barney Hill, their original, the original transcript of their hypnotic regression doesn't mention aliens at all. It mentions a redheaded Irishman with a German Shepherd and a bunch of guys dressed up in black jumpsuits with silver piping, which is the same kind of uniform that SS Panzer crews wore, with peaked caps.
Well, see, now that begs to ask which came first, the Nazis or the aliens, because Hitler and his whole crew and the whole dark circle of the SS was steeped in that, and they supposedly were in contact with aliens.
What if I told you that the bell, de Glocke, was actually found by somebody in schematics from the late 1800s?
Hold on a second, I'm dropping my mic. What? I did not know that. I'm familiar with der Glocken, but I never knew that.
Yeah, it was a friend of mine named Walter Bosley. He found it in Del Shaw's schematics from like 1897.
Wow.
Changes everything.
That's, and I've learned something today. That's incredible. I love that.
Yeah. We'll talk about that next time.
Man,
I'll lay out a completely different strategy of how the secret space program functions.
See, that I am interested in. I am very interested in.
Yeah.
Well, listen, Olaf, man, we're right at the end of the time. If you'll stick around just long enough, let me do a quick outro. I'll be right back with you and talk a little bit longer if it's all right.
Yeah, no problem.
All right. And there it is, folks. Olav Phillips. my mind is blown. And we didn't even really get hardcore into space Nazis. That's how deep this goes. But I'll tell you what, folks, I appreciate you being here. And again, please check up Olav's pages, check out the magazines he writes on, and go subscribe. I did. And please subscribe to my YouTube page as well. But for those that are in the sunlight, please enjoy it and take in all the fruits of the day and in your respective parts of the world. But as the sun sets and the shadows grow long, check under your bed, your closet, out the back of your thatched hut. You never know what's there. There might be a space Nazi, but it's okay because, I don't know, they look kind of goofy to me, so just kind of laugh at them. And but until next time, everybody, take care and stay scared.